taking care of the horses? Do you
So
take
he's
them?
taking care of the horses and cleaning the stalls, and I was helping too. You know, he helps feed morning and night. And on my days off that I used to have the clients, I was out there cleaning stalls with him too.
And that's their first few years were hard because we were so set in our ways.
No, first 6 months.
It took a couple years really for that to
Years.
even out. So,
First
but
6 months.
Kenny been on his own for, 13 years or so. And of course, I was 33.
Answer to you.
Yeah. And you know, and I've been in the supervisor position, so I was like, don't boss him around. But I never was a real awesome supervisor. No, I really didn't. But and thankfully, we each were good at letting us do our own thing. You know, not being like, what kind of little tall, you know, just little things like that. Neither one of us did that.
I had, you know, big command presence
Yeah.
and was
Oh, yeah.
used to, you know, authority and investigator too. So it's like every time I would ask him about something, it was more of an interrogation.
My biggest problem,
Well,
every time I
back
left
up.
the house, he'd be like, what time you coming back? I'm like, why are you going to tell him?
You see, that was like, I gave this guy one time. I'll tell you what, he was like Velcro on me. I'm like, I can't take it. That didn't last very long.
He's a big difference maybe from him.
He was a great guy, but other than that, but I was like, I can't take that.
Well, good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Happy Sunday to you. Glad you all are here. Hope you all are doing well. Happy May, now that we're in the month of May. I'm going to try teaching with a new piece of hardware or a new toy. This is a tablet that my brother got for me. He was able to get hold of some through his work for very cheap, and so it's free for me, and I thought it might help teaching and especially preaching. You all probably see I print out my notes for preaching, and I thought maybe I could save ink and paper and money if I don't do that. And so I'm going to try it this morning in here and up there, and if we have any hiccups, I apologize. I tried it on a Sunday night recently, and it seemed to go well. So anyways, well, let's get into class and begin, as we always do, with the word of prayer. Thank you, those of you, if you've been in prayer for our family over the past week. I'm sure you saw about Mark on Wednesday breaking his collarbone. It's why we weren't able to meet Wednesday night, so I apologize for that. He is actually, under the circumstances, doing very well. He's just learned very quickly, starting the next day, how to make limited use of his left arm. And truly limited use, not no use. He's already using it a little more than he was, but he's just being very careful with that one, and he's otherwise just doing great. So we're really thankful that it is not a more severe thing for him and for the rest of us than it is. But let's keep him in prayer. Any other prayer requests or prayers of praise for this morning? Joe mentioned a family that was involved in that shooting at the bank in Lexington. That was this past week? The Switzer family, and they know that Jen knows the family, right?
Yeah, Milo goes to school with the little girl.
Gotcha. So Milo goes to school with a little girl whose father was killed in the shooting. So we certainly want to be praying for that family and for all the families affected by that tragedy. Anyone else? Well, I suppose it's good news if we don't have many other prayer requests. We do have, of course, the folks we regularly lift up in prayer. But if there's nothing else, then let's bow and pray to God. Thank you, Father, for this morning, for this time that we can gather together as your people and worship you later, and also spend this time in your word. be glorified in this time. Father, thank you for the ways you've provided for us this past week. Thank you for the ways you've provided for us today. Father, we are mindful of those we mentioned this morning. We thank you that little Mark is doing well from his broken collarbone already, doing so much better as a 2-year-old than adults would be doing in a situation like this, and pray that you'll continue to bless him with healing. Be with the Switzer family right now and everyone who lost loved ones or who was injured and traumatized in the horrible shooting at the bank. Watch over the Switzer family and everyone who's grieving, who is shocked. Bless them in the ways that they need you. We think of those who are regularly on our prayer list: Sue and Daryl, Dale and Doris, Ron and Stephanie. We pray prayer of thanksgiving that Chris's mom is doing better and is back home. And Lord, there are other situations involving folks here, other situations involving our community and our world. We lift them up and ask that your hand will be over all of those situations, and that anyone in any of those who do not know you will come to know you, and that everyone who needs you will receive the things they need from you. Help us to be eager and willing to be the instrument by which your will is done in this church, in your kingdom, and on this earth. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, give me a second to pull up my notes this way. That is my sermon notes. Sorry, that's not what I need. There we go. All right. No? Yes. All right. We're going to work these things out. Well, as we get into John, I'm really excited this morning because we get to begin reading one of the most remarkable moments from the life of Jesus, and one of the most remarkable moments from specifically the Gospel of John, and that's Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. This is really remarkable and really amazing, because all the healings in the world and all the healings that Jesus has performed in this book are just not in the same category as bringing someone who has died back to life. And in addition to just the how amazing that is, there's more to this in John as well. Jesus raising Lazarus looks forward to when Jesus himself rises from the dead. And then Jesus' resurrection in turn looks forward to our future resurrection from the dead. And in a similar way, I don't think we'll make it quite this far this morning, but in a similar way, John is going to make an explicit link between Jesus raising Lazarus and our own resurrection as he narrates this event for us. So there's much more here than just an amazing feat, just an amazing miracle. There is spiritual and theological richness in what happens and in the way John tells us about it. So this is truly not just a miracle, but a sign. Like all the miracles that we've read in John, that John calls signs, they point to a deeper truth that tells us something very important about who Jesus is, and we see what all of that means for us through understanding the significance of the sign. And then within the narrative of John, this particular sign is also going to solidify Jesus' opposition. Jesus has enemies. It's the Jewish leaders who fiercely oppose him, already want to kill him. But what Jesus will do here is going to put their opposition in a new category as well. So just last week, we read about an attempt made by the Jewish leaders to stone Jesus, and I meant to have actually the next verse on the screen for that. It's right after Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," that they attempt to stone Jesus. But that reads in John 10 like a rather sudden, kind of impulsive reaction to something Jesus says that they're horribly offended by. And then before that, we also read them try to stone Jesus another time. That was right after he said another strong statement, when he said, "Before Abraham was, I am." And then they pick up stones and try to stone him there. But that also kind of reads like this sudden kind of knee-jerk response to what Jesus has said. But after Jesus raises Lazarus, this is going to change. So the Jewish leaders are going to begin to plot much more carefully about how they can go about getting rid of Jesus. So it's going to be, their opposition to Jesus is going to become much more premeditated after Jesus raises Lazarus and in connection to Jesus raising Lazarus. And so both of these things, well, great. There was supposed to be a slide. It might be at the very end of the slideshow. So there it is. All right, that'll work. Both of these things, the deep significance of the sign and what it means for us, and also what it means for the opposition of Jesus, both of these things fit with where John has placed this sign within the structure of his gospel. So I know this is a slide that you've seen several times. If you've been here, as we've been working through John together. And I've offered this to us as kind of a bare bones structure of the first half of the Gospel of John, where there are 7 signs. After a period of preparation, which is when Jesus calls disciples and John the Baptist is baptizing. But after that, there are 7 signs, and they can be divided up into 2 groups of 3, within the 7th one coming along as like kind of like the capstone to all of them. So by the time we come to this passage, Jesus has turned water to wine, he's cleansed the temple, he's healed the son of, it says centurion, that should be official, but he's healed an official son. He's healed a person who was lame. He's fed 5,000 people, 5,000 men, even more, including women and children. He healed a man who's born blind. But the ultimate sign of this part of John is when Jesus raises someone from the dead. So putting it last makes it very much work like a grand finale, really. And then this grand finale comes right before Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, where Jesus is going to be arrested and crucified. And he's arrested and crucified in large part because of the way the Jews plan to get rid of him after this sign. And so it's very fitting that Jesus raising Lazarus comes where it does in the book, right at the end of the first half of John and right as we're on the cusp of the second half. Does that make sense? Any questions, reflections on the significance of this sign and where it's located? Well, pardon me, let me go back since the slides are out of order here. But let's go ahead and begin reading, and let's just see how much ground we can cover this morning. So the first few verses of chapter 11 really set the stage for the sign itself. So this is verses 1 through 5. Can I get a volunteer to read this passage? Thank you, Barbara.
Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus.
All right, so the narrative begins by introducing us to some new characters. We haven't read about Lazarus or Mary or Martha before now in the Gospel of John. So we meet them here. We learn that they live in Bethany, which is a little village that, as we'll see, is just outside of Jerusalem. And we learn a little bit here, a little bit more about specifically Lazarus and Mary. So Lazarus is ill, and as we know, he's going to pass away from this illness, but we haven't read that yet. Right now, he's ill. Mary, we read here, is the person who, John says, anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. Now, this is very interesting to me because if you can, think back to everything we've read in the Gospel of John. Have we read this moment? We have not. This moment is not in the Gospel of John yet. Now, we will come to it in John chapter 12. So, right here, John is looking ahead to something that Mary is going to do. But this is also something that may sound familiar because we read of something very similar to this happening in the other Gospels. So perhaps John can reference it here and assume that his readers already know what he's talking about, even though he hasn't narrated it yet, because he's assuming they're familiar with at least one or maybe all three of the other Gospels. We've seen clearer instances of this as we've read, where John will kind of cryptically say something or hint at something that we can understand only if we've read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so this might be another instance of that. Now, we do know about Mary and Martha from the other Gospels as well. Specifically, the Gospel of Luke writes about Mary and Martha, but we only read about their brother Lazarus here in John. Now, the action really gets going in verse 3, where Mary and Martha send word to Jesus that Lazarus is ill. And notice the way they word it. They say, "He whom you love is ill." And as we read at the end of this passage in verse 5, Jesus does in fact love Lazarus, and not just Lazarus, but also Mary and Martha. So John doesn't bother to tell us how this has come about, but in one way or another, this is a family that has become very dear to Jesus. And given that they, I'm sure, know about Jesus' miracles and know that he's healed people, even healed people from a distance, we can probably suspect that they are notifying Jesus about Lazarus' poor health because they want him to heal him. They want him to come and heal him. And as we'll read later in the chapter, this is it becomes more explicit that is exactly what they had hoped would happen by letting Jesus know that Lazarus is sick. Now we read in verse 4 Jesus' response when he receives word that Lazarus is sick. He says that Lazarus' illness will not lead to death. Instead, this is happening for the glory of God and for the glorification of the Son. That's what Jesus says when he gets word that Lazarus is sick. We can appreciate the kind of nuance behind what Jesus is saying here because we know the rest of the story. Because, of course, Lazarus' illness will, in fact, lead to his death, but it won't ultimately lead to his death. That's not the end point. The end point, what it's really leading to, is actually life from the dead, resurrection. And so Lazarus' death is really just like a pit stop on the way. So Lazarus' illness does not actually lead to death. It leads to resurrection. Pardon me, I'm still kind of fighting this cold that's been hanging on a long time, so I'm sorry if that gets in the way of things this morning. But it is in connection to Jesus raising Lazarus that he says in verse 4 that this illness is for the glory of God. Lazarus is ill, and he's ill so that God can be glorified through it. That might sound kind of familiar. This is back in chapter 9, where Jesus said something very similar about the man born blind. I remember in that moment when Jesus and his disciples first come across that man, the disciples ask, who sinned Jesus, this man or his parents, that he's born blind? And we can see Jesus' response here. He says, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. So in both cases, John 9 and then here in John 11, God is going to work through something that we wouldn't wish on anyone, right? Blindness or someone dying. He's going to work through something that we wouldn't wish on anyone. And everyone in both cases, not just the blind man, not just Lazarus, but everyone, at least everyone who has eyes to see, will be better for it. And so Jesus says here in verse 4, he says a little bit more that is important. He doesn't just say this is for the glory of God, it is also so that the Son of God will be glorified. So like we read just last week at the end of chapter 10, Jesus said, I and the Father are one, right? The Father and Son are one. So to glorify one is to glorify the other. This is an important point that I want to take a moment to dwell on, and it'll become more explicit as we read Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. But when God gets the glory, everyone is blessed. When God gets the glory, everyone is blessed. We tend to think, when we think of giving someone glory and honor, that means heaping all the attention and all the praise, heaping the spot or putting the spotlight firmly on that person for their benefit alone. It has nothing to do with us. And that is, when we worship God, what we're seeking to do, right? We're seeking to empty ourselves and give Him all the glory and honor. But when we glorify God, God, in His generosity, is glorified by means of things that bless others. And so thinking beyond this passage a little bit to kind of a broader truth, that's really because we are created to glorify God. We're created to do that. And that means, if we're created to do that, that we are most fully human when God is being glorified. And so that means our lives most fully flourish when we are glorifying Him with our lives. Again, I know that's getting a little bit beyond the bounds of verse 4, but I do think that's something that will be true of John 11 as a whole. Any questions or comments on verses 1 through 5 before we keep on going? Go ahead, Bob. Barbara can shoot. Thank you.
I would like to talk a little bit about verse 3. Verse 3.
Mm-hmm.
Lord, he whom you love is ill. I think the emphasis is on love. I don't want to use the word guilty, but it seems like to me it's putting some pressure on Jesus to heal Lazarus. That's my thought. That's my thinking.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be more concerned because it's the one you love. And the one you love, you're going to take care of. The one you're going to sacrifice some time and effort to take care of.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to read this, especially in light of who else Jesus has healed. He's healed complete strangers in the Gospel of John. And so they're saying, this person you already know and love is ill. And so I think, there could be a little unspoken pressure saying, you really got to come and heal this person if you've healed these other folks. Yeah, I think that's very fair to see going on here. Okay, well, let's keep on reading. Let's move into verses 6 through 10. Barbara, if you'd be willing to read this passage for us also.
So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? So if anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him."
Okay, so we read here that Jesus remains for 2 days in the place where he was when he hears the news that Lazarus is ill. And by the way, something we learned at the end of chapter 10, Jesus is on the other side of the Jordan River. So he's a good distance away from Jerusalem right now. He's out where John the Baptist was first baptizing people during his ministry. And so, anyways, he's going to remain for 2 days where he is. Those extra 2 days are going to be very important later in the narrative. But we do see here a pattern in John that this passage is in alignment with, and that's Jesus operates on his own timetable. So back in chapter 7, when Jesus was going to go up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles, his brothers were saying, "You need to go up and show yourself to the world." And Jesus said, "Not right now," right? And then later, he went up, right? He went on his own time, not when his brothers thought he should go. This even kind of connects back to John chapter 2, when Jesus was at the wedding and they ran out of wine, and his mother is saying they have no wine, Jesus says, my hour has not yet come. Now then, he does actually proceed to turn the water to wine. So I realize there's a little bit of a difference there. But there's still this theme of Jesus is going to operate on a different timetable than we may expect him to. And this passage is very much in line with that. But after those 2 days pass, Jesus tells his disciples, verses 7 and 8, he basically says, well, let's go back to Judea. And the disciples, as we read here, are really not sure that that's a good idea. And that's really putting it mildly, because they point out, the Jews in Judea, they want to stone you to death, Jesus. And that is something that will be very fresh on their minds, a fresh reality for Jesus and his disciples. This is at the very end of just the previous chapter. We read that when Jesus again said, I and the Father are one, the Jews tried to stone him right then and there. And so this is something that's very fresh to them. And this is, if we were to keep on reading in John 10, this is the very reason that Jesus left Judea and went to the other side of the Jordan in the first place. This is what prompted him to do that. So Jesus' disciples are understandably hesitant to commit to another trip to Judea. They know this would endanger their lives. This would endanger Jesus' life. They don't think it's a good idea to go. And then Jesus here in verses 9 and 10 gives what I think, at least on the surface when we first read it, is kind of a strange response to their hesitancy. Verses 9 and 10. I'll read it again. He says, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. Again, maybe just not the most obviously relevant thing for Jesus to say. What do you think he means by this? What do you think he's trying to say in verses 9 and 10? Any thoughts? It's okay if you don't have any, but Barbara, go ahead.
I was just thinking it could be a subliminal message to the disciples to just obey him and not doubt him. Hey, you're with the light.
Yeah.
We're going to be okay.
Yeah.
We're not going to stumble. But, when I'm not here, there'll be.
I am inclined to agree with you. I think that something kind of similar to that is going on. Mary, are you wanting to throw in something?
I was just thinking maybe he's trying to tell them, you have all this time to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
So why not get it done, before dark? Why don't you go ahead and do what needs to be done?
I think those two statements go together really well. Yeah. So it can be helpful. Oh, go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think also along those lines, Jesus is a support system for those that's in light. He's like a cheerleader to keep you going.
Maybe even more than a cheerleader. Maybe the thing that keeps you going entirely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
So I think we're all hitting at the what seems to be the basic message here. I just want to put on the screen a passage that I think is a little clearer when Jesus uses similar language. This is again back in John chapter 9 when Jesus healed the man born blind. We already read from verse 3 earlier, but let's look at the rest of the passage. Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." So in both places, in John 9 and then here in John 11, Jesus seems to be saying that the time for him to do the things he's doing is now. But eventually, the time will come where he's not going to be doing these things. And let me see if I can go back to verse 9 here. In the context of John chapter 11, where he's responding to the concern of the disciples about potentially dying if they go back there, if they go back to that region, I think Jesus is saying, now is not the time where we have to worry about something like dying. He says, right now it's daytime, so you're not going to stumble. So here, stumble, we often think about that in terms of sin. In the context, I think he means like stumble and fall and hurt yourself, or stumble and fall and die. I think he's saying nothing is going to happen right now, and it's because we'll be doing the Father's will. So that's kind of like what you were getting at, Barbara, a way of reassuring, if you just trust me, everything's going to be okay. Okay, so Jesus is ready to go back to Judea again. The disciples are hesitant. Jesus has offered some words of reassurance to them. And then we read this in verses 11 through 16. Barbara, if you'd like to read again for us, verses 11 through 16.
After,
Yep. Yes.
Can I ask a question before we go on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it possible that we can walk in darkness and light at the same time? I'm just trying to figure it out.
Possible that we can walk in darkness and light at the same time. John would say no. I'm thinking about like 1 John, where very similar language is used. And he operates in 1 John in very like either or categories. You're either in the world or you're with the Father. You're either in light or you're in darkness. You're either with the truth or you're with what is false. He's operating in that very straightforward, simple way of thinking. Because I think he's talking about the overall pattern of your life. The overall pattern of your life, there can only be one pattern to it, and it's either a pattern of light or a pattern of darkness. But when we drill down and think about the specifics of daily life, I do think that as we seek to walk in the light, there are moments where we do that very imperfectly, and it looks like a little bit of darkness is still there. And that's because our hearts are continually being worked on, you know. And that sounds more like the way the Apostle Paul thinks in some of his letters. You know, it's a continual journey of growing, and along the way, you know, we don't begin perfect. We work towards that. And so there can be some of what looks like some darkness in our life because the old self is something that we are continually growing out of as we're putting on the new self. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Bob? Yeah. Yeah. Mary, go ahead.
I would say that, thank you, Bob. It's kind of like you on the fence. You know, you can't decide whether you want to go over that fence or come back to what you're doing. Being human part of us, we walk in the light, you know, but that little darkness is still there. You know, we still try to, hold on to it, in other words. So I can see doing both.
Yeah, and that reminds me of also Hebrews exhorting us, like, lay aside the sin that clings so close, like, put that behind you. And that's a lifelong journey of doing that. But the very act of doing it, kind of like if we think about someone trying to get in physical shape, you know, the very act of doing the exercise is setting the trajectory of your life. That is the act of walking in the light, even as we're not in the shape we want to be in yet, you know, and so.
That's what I was saying a few minutes ago about Jesus being our support system. Jesus is with us to help us not stumble.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. As he empowers us to not stumble. All right, well, let's get into verses 11 through 16 now. Barbara, if you'd like, go ahead and read this passage for us.
After saying these things, he said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that he meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him."
Okay, so we learn here that Lazarus has died. That's what we learn in this passage. And notice how we learn it. Jesus has received no word that we read of, no update from Mary and Martha, no second letter letting him know. It seems as though Jesus has supernatural knowledge of how Lazarus is doing, and he knows that Lazarus has actually passed by now. So Jesus first tells the disciples this, tells them that Lazarus has passed, by saying Lazarus has fallen asleep, and he says he's going to go wake him up. And the disciples, in what is kind of a comical little moment in this passage, I think, the disciples take Jesus too literally. They think that Jesus is saying that Lazarus is literally getting some good rest. And if he's getting rest, then they should just let Lazarus sleep. That will ensure that he recovers faster. Might give him a better chance of recovery. Now, if you're like me, maybe you've often wondered as you've read this, how could the disciples so badly misunderstand what Jesus seems to be so obviously saying here? It's almost at first glance stretches believability that they would misunderstand Jesus here. And it does kind of make them look comical, like in the other Gospels. There are moments where they really put their foot in their mouth or really fall flat on their face or just don't understand what seems so clear to us. It's kind of a similar effect here. But in their defense, let's keep in mind that Jesus seems to be the only one who knows that Lazarus has died. No one else is aware of that. As far as the disciples know, Lazarus is just sick. And also, let's keep in mind that they haven't seen Jesus raise someone else from the dead. Now, we know he can do that because we know this passage, we know the resurrection. But again, that's in a whole different category than just healing someone who's blind or who's been paralyzed. Raising someone from the dead is a new feat. And so these two things together, they have no frame of reference for thinking about death right now, and they have no reason to think that Jesus is going to be concerned with raising someone from the dead. Well, maybe death is just something that's not crossing their minds right now. And so if Jesus said he's going to wake Lazarus up, then it must be that he's referring to sleep, not to death, in the mind of the disciples. Of course, they're wrong, but maybe that's why they get things so plainly wrong here. Barbara, I saw your hand start to go up.
So if we're just sticking to the book of John, that's true, but having read the other Gospels, we know that some point earlier in his ministry, he raised a little girl from the dead.
Great point.
So and he brought two of the disciples into the room with him, who are there now.
Yeah.
So they do know that he can raise someone from the dead, although that was an instant thing where the person had just died, and then he raised him, so there could be some question or doubt in people's mind in general that she was ever really dead. But in this case, we know it's going to be days later, which is probably the point why he waited so long to go.
Yeah, so two great things in what you said. One is, in John, we haven't read Jesus raised someone from the dead. And there is something to be said for always making that our first our first stop when we're trying to interpret a passage is what is fair just within the confines of John. There's a place to go out and look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke too, but John is the one writing this, and he's writing a whole narrative that's meant to work on its own. And so in John, we haven't seen this happen. Now, in Jesus' life, you're right, that we do read of Jesus raising that little girl from the dead, and he takes just a couple of his apostles in there with him. And if I remember right, he tells them, don't share this with anyone. And so when it says the disciples think he's talking about sleeping, maybe two of them know that something else could be in mind. But as a whole, the majority may not have the information to think along those lines. But great point. All right. So they misunderstand Jesus here when he says that Lazarus is only sleeping. And then when we come to latter part of verse 14 and then into verse 15, Jesus tells them plainly so that there's no way they're going to misunderstand. He says, Lazarus has died. And what Jesus says next in this statement is really important, and it connects with two earlier things Jesus has already said in this chapter. So it says, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. I want us to keep this statement in mind and look back at a couple of earlier statements Jesus has made. So I just got them up here side by side. When Jesus first said that Lazarus died using the metaphor of sleep, he said that he was going to go wake him up. And we know what he's talking about. That's a reference to resurrection, raising him from the dead. But when Jesus says the same thing more plainly here in this passage, notice the resurrection reference is kind of taken out. I think it's fair to say it's drastically changed. He says this time that he was glad that he wasn't there when Lazarus died, so that you may believe. Okay, so clearly the first half of both of these statements parallel with one another. Falling asleep equals dying, right? So they are parallel statements. And if the first half is parallel, then that suggests that the second half of both of these statements is also, that they're also in parallel with one another. So if that's the case, then when we put these two together, waking Lazarus up is something that is meant to bring the disciples to belief. Does that make sense? And this will become even clearer as we keep on reading in John 11, but we're getting hints of it here. Waking Lazarus up, something that is meant to bring the disciples to belief. Now, I've got another passage now alongside this statement. The second half of this statement in verse 15 is a purpose statement. Jesus says he's glad he wasn't there when Lazarus passed, so that, here's the purpose, so that the disciples may believe. Well, this is the second purpose statement that we've read so far in chapter 11. So, in the first one, Jesus said that Lazarus' illness was for, here's purpose again, for the glory of God, for the glory of the Son. And then again, in the second one, the purpose is so that the disciples may believe. So here's another parallel statement. And I think we see from it that glorifying God is something that is meant to move people to belief. It is meant to move them to faith.
Or maybe the opposite too. Belief glorifies God.
Good point. Yeah, these things can feed off of each other. Yeah. Now, I do want us to think about this for a moment. Jesus says, this in the second purpose statement, the purpose here is so that they may believe, and these are Jesus' disciples we're talking about. Well, don't they already believe?
Not enough.
That's right. Belief, this is such an important thing in John, an important thing in the Christian life in general. Belief is not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. It is not that a person either believes or doesn't believe, and that's all there is to it. It's not quite that black and white. Belief is something that must grow, that must deepen, that must mature. And so when we're thinking along those lines, belief and unbelief are more like points on a spectrum, and everyone lands somewhere on that spectrum, and we must grow in our belief. That's what Jesus wants for his disciples. So Lazarus has died, and what is going to happen next is meant to help the disciples grow in their belief, deepen their faith. And this fits with the purpose statement of the whole book, which we've come back to several times as we've read through John together. It says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Well, the Gospel of John is a book written for Christians. And yet John wants the Christians who already have faith, he wants them to read it and believe. So here we see again, he wants to deepen their belief. And in the process of deepening their belief, he wants to enrich that life that they find in the name of Jesus. And so that is exactly the same thing that Jesus wants for his disciples here in chapter 11. It's the same thing that John wants for us as we read the entire book. Jesus wants it for the disciples here in John 11. And to circle back here, well, Jesus wants to deepen their faith. And what is it that is going to deepen their faith? The glory of God. I'll come to you in just a second, Bob. The glory of God, the glory of His Son. This is what is going to deepen their faith. So we see, I think, an important application here. The more in touch we are with the power, character, actions, the mission and person of God, the more in touch we are with that, the deeper our faith will be. And as a result, thinking back to the purpose statement in John, the richer our lives will be. It's as we are in touch with the glory of God that our faith deepens. All right, so that's a connection with the purpose statement at the end of the book. I also want us to think about this statement in connection to something from the beginning of the book, from the prologue. This is what John says before telling us anything about Jesus' ministry. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So John says at the beginning of the book that he, and he's using plural language, we have seen the glory of the Word. We've seen the glory of the Son. Well, John chapter 11 is a major place where that's going to happen. All of Jesus' life really is a manifestation of His glory, but there are moments where that glory is especially on display. So in the other Gospels, we can think of a moment like the Transfiguration. Jesus' glory is just on display. Well, here in John, raising Lazarus from the dead is going to be a huge display of the glory of God, and it is meant to deepen faith. That was actually the second bell. Bob, if you want to hold your comment for next week, you can, or if you want to talk to me one-on-one, you can. Okay, all right. We'll pick up here next time. But we made it through 16 verses. I think that's pretty impressive. Thank you, everybody.